organization that $900 million contract. In testimony, Trudeau said he should not have been involved in the decision, but said it was the only option given to him by the civil service. Tom Perry begins coverage.
I should have recused myself.
For 90 minutes, Justin Trudeau argued his case, acknowledging he should have stepped back from a decision to outsource the government's youth volunteer program to the We charity, while insisting the original idea didn't come from him.
The recommendation came forward from the public service. I sent it back to the public service to say, you really need to make sure that this is indeed the only organization that can deliver this program.
Trudeau says he knew there would be questions. We has paid his mother, brother, and wife roughly $500,000 in speaking fees and expenses.
My mother
How much?
has
just the dollar figure.
Throughout her life.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Ways.
Conservative MP Pierre Poilievre tried to get Trudeau to break down those payments, but Trudeau says they had nothing to do with the government's decision. The opposition now wants to know who else in the PMO may have spoken to We. Tom Perry, CBC News, Ottawa.
That's Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba speaking at a press conference this morning following late-night talks with the Iranian government. They spoke about the Ukraine International Airlines flight that was shot down in Iran back in January. All people aboard Flight 752 died, including dozens of Canadians and permanent residents. Dmytro says they agreed the investigation needs to be open and transparent, but did not agree on compensation for the families of the victims. Australia is going to compel U.S. tech giants Facebook and Google to pay Australian media outlets for their news content.
It's about a fair go for Australian news media businesses. It's about ensuring that we have increased competition, increased consumer protection, and a sustainable media landscape.
That's Australia's Treasurer Josh Frydenberg unveiling the royalty-style system, which becomes law later this year and could prove to be a landmark case for countries seeking protections for domestic media industries. This morning, Hong Kong is postponing local elections that were set to take place in September, saying the COVID-19 pandemic is making it difficult to hold the votes safely. Hong Kong is in the midst of a third wave, close to 100 new cases of the disease being reported daily. Pro-democracy advocates say, though, putting off the election is the latest example by the Chinese government's increasing control of the city. 12 known pro-democracy activists have also been forbidden running for local office. The elections will now take place in 2021. Muslims around the world are celebrating Eid al-Adha under COVID-19 restrictions. In Jakarta this morning, hundreds gathered at a mosque for prayers after facing temperature checks and donning masks. Eid al-Adha marks the end of Hajj, but this year, for the first time in the modern era, Muslims from abroad were unable to make the pilgrimage to Mecca because of social distancing and public health measures. In Orlando, Florida last night,
tonight's presentation of the national anthem has been recorded by musician, producer, activist, and Louisiana native Jon Batiste.
NBA players returning to the first games under COVID-19 rules knelt when the anthem here, the U.S. anthem, started playing. They also wore jerseys with Black Lives Matters. Coaches and game officials joined members of the Utah Jazz and New Orleans Pelicans taking a knee to protest racial injustice and police brutality. Drew Holiday plays with the Pelicans.
You know, two teams who are about to go out there on the court and battle, we can also come together and fight for something. And I feel like that was huge. That's one of the reasons why I feel like we came back and why the league wanted us to come back.
Players with the LA Lakers and Clippers also knelt during the national anthem in the second game at the NBA's so-called Disney World bubble. The Toronto Raptors defend their title beginning tomorrow night.
Hello, I'm Catherine Dow from the CTV Newsroom in Winnipeg. Here are the top stories. The opposition is planning to keep the pressure on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau after his testimony on the We Charity contract. The Commons Finance Committee, looking into the now cancelled We Charity contract, is asking for names and documents from the Prime Minister's office to see if they back up what he said during his testimony. Saskatchewan's spike in COVID-19 infections keeps rising, with another double-digit jump in cases. Saskatchewan now recording the highest weekly number of COVID-19 cases per capita in the country. It saw 38 new cases yesterday and another death. Brazil's First Lady has tested positive for COVID-19 as the country sets a new daily record for people dying of the virus. Brazil's health ministry yesterday reported almost 1,600 deaths and nearly 70,000 new cases. The country now has more than 2.5 million cases, second only to the U.S. And hockey gets official this weekend. The round-robin best-of-5 playoff series starts tomorrow with Edmonton, Montreal, Winnipeg, and Calgary in action. The Leafs and Blue Jackets will play Sunday, along with the Canucks taking on the Wild. For all the day's top stories and breaking news as it happens, tune to CTV News Channel or go online to ctvnews.ca. I'm Catherine Dow.
From CNBC Tech Check at 2:54 p.m. yesterday.
I'm Kate Rooney, and here is your CNBC Tech Check. An email released by the House Antitrust Subcommittee shows negotiations between Amazon and Apple over revenue sharing from the Amazon Prime Video app. Apple executive Eddie Q emailed Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos in 2016, suggesting Apple would take a 15% fee on subscriptions that signed up through the app. The email suggests that big players can negotiate for better business terms on Apple's App Store, contradicting Apple's public stance that all apps are treated the same. Google's $2.1 billion bid for fitness tracker Fitbit will face a full-scale European Union investigation next week. The deal, which was announced last fall, would see Google compete with Apple and Samsung in the fitness tracking and smartwatch market, alongside others including Huawei. Google offered not to use Fitbit's health data to help it target ads in an attempt to address the EU's concerns. And finally, TikTok is planning to support the next generation of talent on its platform with a $2 billion TikTok Creator Fund over the next 3 years. Details of the application process and how much individuals can earn are yet to be revealed. Owned by China's ByteDance, TikTok's new fund will let influencers generate revenue on its platform. And that's it from the West Coast. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
From DW News Brief at 7 a.m. today.
This is DW News, and these are our top stories. Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam has just announced that September's Legislative Council elections will be postponed by 1 year. The vote would have been Hong Kong's first since a controversial security law was brought into effect. Lam cited the spike in coronavirus cases as the reason for the delay. Tens of thousands of people have turned out in the Belarusian capital Minsk to support opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya just over a week before presidential elections there. The 37-year-old is challenging the decades-long rule of Alexander Lukashenko. He accuses the opposition of trying to topple him with foreign assistance. Worshippers in Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim country, held morning prayers to kick off the Eid al-Adha celebrations. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, special precautions were taken. The country's religious ministry advised attendees to wear masks and adhere to social distancing. Mosques were also asked to shorten prayer ceremonies. This is DW News from Berlin. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DW News. And do visit our website, dw.com.
From Bloomberg First Word at 6:44 a.m. today.
Senate Republicans want to go on the record as saying they tried to restore supplemental jobless benefits for millions of Americans. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is trying to force a debate on a stopgap measure for those $600 a week checks. The payments expired this week. Democrats want the jobless benefits extended too, but only as part of a larger relief package. President Trump's coming under pressure to set a national strategy for the coronavirus. The White House has largely avoided strict rules or a master plan that's left many of the decisions to industry or state leaders. Experts say that has made shortages of protective gear at hospitals worse, and it could complicate distribution of vaccines. It's official, the euro area economy plunged into an unprecedented slump in the second quarter due to coronavirus lockdowns, and it may take years to fully recover. The euro area saw a 12.1% contraction. Spain took the biggest hit, shrinking 18.5%. France and Italy also dropped by double digits. In the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government has reimposed lockdown restrictions for millions of people. Authorities targeted a large part of northern England. They say people there failed to follow social distancing measures, and that led to a spike in coronavirus cases. People in Greater Manchester and part of Lancashire and Yorkshire will no longer be able to meet indoors with members of other households. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg.
All right, guys, let's do podcast. Just give me 2 seconds.
Do you guys like podcasts? Attempts to understand.
Nicole Hannah Jones and acclaimed television host Hassan Minhaj.
And I think it's fair to say. We're coming up on 5 months since much of the country shut down to contain COVID-19, and I think it's fair to say the country hasn't been the same since. But today on the show, we want to find out how people who have had COVID are doing, those who have survived. It was about 5 months ago I spoke to Carl, who got COVID on the Diamond Princess cruise ship. I spoke to him again last night. Hello, Carl.
Hey, Sean, how are you doing?
Doing well, but it looks like you might be back in the hospital?
Yeah, I'm back in the hospital, but I'm okay.
I'm glad to hear that. The last time we spoke, you were at a quarantine facility in Omaha, Nebraska, and this was, I believe, early March. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I ended up being there for 29 days, climbing the walls to get out of there.
Substantial. Okay, so 29 days in a quarantine facility. What happened over the course of those 29 days? Why did it take so long to get out?
They don't know. Right now, the CDC back then said I had to have 2 negative results, and it just took that long. And the doctor kept handing the results on a Post-it note. I mean, it was like the Grim Reaper coming in. He changed colors every once in a while. I have a collection now of Post-it notes with my negatives and positives on there, but I kept testing positive for a long time.
And so eventually what? One day you just tested negative?
Yeah, one day I tested negative, and then and we had to wait 2 days. 2 days later I tested negative, and I was a free man.
And what did you do then? Did they put you back on a private plane, or did you just get to walk over to the airport?
A private plane. A friend had gotten me a charter private plane that went from Omaha back to Southern California. And then a friend picked me up in a long stretch limo and had gotten me a giant bowl of my favorite ice cream. So I had the peanut butter cup ice cream.
Wow, Carl, I've heard a lot of sad stories about COVID-19, but that is a happy ending to a pretty rough start there.
Absolutely, but where I'm sitting right now is back in the hospital. So what happened is my body, I think, at least the doctors seem to think that makes sense. My body did a great job of fighting corona, but I had a precondition of what's called GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is why they put me in the isolation unit to begin with, the quarantine unit, biocontainment unit. My body did a great job of fighting the COVID-19, but I couldn't touch the GBS, and the doctors couldn't touch the GBS while I was sitting there the 29 days, plus all the time on the Diamond Princess. So here I am now with numb legs, numb feet. It's a condition called CIDP, which is a chronic version. They've now tried 2 different kinds of treatments for me, so this is my second round in the hospital since I returned home at the mid-March. And I've got about a week of therapy to learn to walk again.
Wow.
Now, the one cool thing I wanted to share with you and your listeners is that we were invited, my wife and I were invited back to the White House in April. And it was very magical. And I say this to everyone, if Obama had invited me back, I would be just as a thrill. But having Vice President Pence spend the whole day with us, he and his staff, and then President Trump was supposed to spend about 5 minutes with us, which ended up being about an hour and a half.
But this was great. I thought, I was talking to Mike, I said, come on, this will take 5 minutes. And it's taken a lot longer than 5 minutes, and that's because I found it so interesting. Just great.
There were 8 of us who, from different walks of life, different ends of the spectrum politically, and different experiences with COVID-19.
The President and I wanted to have a chance to see all of you and to let the country hear your stories, because while we rightly as a nation reflect on the more than 23,000 Americans who have succumbed to the coronavirus, as a tribute to our healthcare workers, we also do well to reflect on more than 44,000 Americans who have fully recovered, and you're among them.
So you traveled to D.C. and you didn't say hello to us? We're all here in D.C., Carl.
I know. They shipped us right off to a hotel. We were all in quarantine, of course.
Okay, fair. Other than your GBS acting up and leading to this chronic CIDP, have you had any lingering effects of COVID directly?
Yeah, they're still doing. I signed up back when I was in Nebraska for a clinical study. So they're still following me right now to see what it was. And they took many, many tests there. And then our blood, one of the hospitals here, Providence, took our blood because my wife was in a cesspool of corona and never got it. She, even though she was in that cesspool of corona, never got the virus. And they tested her, and she's got no antibodies, or very few, showing the virus in there. But what they did is they took out her T cells, and her T cells are kind of like a Superman. They touch the virus and instantly kill it. So they brought in all varieties of coronavirus from around the world, which I think is some 20 or 30 different species of the virus. Did the same thing with the T cells, and the same thing happened. Her T cells instantly killed every one of the viruses. So now they're digging deeper to try and figure out what's in her blood that makes her the superwoman, and see if they can get some answers that way. So they're studying us from the various degrees. Obviously, with CIDP now and GBS, having had corona, having had COVID-19, they're watching very carefully to see what transpires. Both can be deadly if they get in the lungs. I've been very, very lucky that neither has gotten in my lungs, so I've been very good with that. Although I have noticed that my voice is much wispier. I'm a broadcast guy too. We own the local radio station out here, and usually have a booming voice, but that disappeared about 3 weeks ago, and I don't know, nor do the doctors know, if it's something totally unique, if it's dealing with it and tied in with CIDP, or if it is post-corona. We may never know the answer to that. And I'm finding little things with that are after effects. And again, with each of those, I'm having trouble distinguishing if it was between CIDP or corona.
And in the meantime, what's your disposition? How do you feel? Are you feeling lucky that you beat it?
I feel great psychologically. I still have my sense of humor. I plan to, I've got a goal of skiing again next winter, even though I probably won't do the extreme slopes, and then bicycling next summer. So I plan to plow through this and lead a normal life when I'm done. It may take a while, but I'm going to do it.
That's amazing to hear, and I commend your spirit. Just so we can set our clocks, when is it that you're going to be skiing and this is all going to be over?
I believe by my 68th birthday, which is February 22nd, is my prediction. So maybe you can join me on the slopes.
I hope you're right. If you're right, I certainly will. Thank you so much, Carl, and good luck. I hope you get out of the hospital soon.
For sure. Thanks, Sean. You take care.
Carl's actually been kind of lucky. There's a raft of lingering effects of COVID people are experiencing. That's after the break on Today Explained. An app That American City, $20 play. Podcast is listening. Want to keep up.
And I am a freelance at the CDC, depending people still had symptoms. Many people with mild
who took and the only thing outside my house are rats.
Well, I know you probably don't want to hear this, and I'm a freelance investigator.
Economic climate, the Smart Money Show has you covered.
My name is Lois Parsley, and I am a freelance investigative journalist and the 2019-2020 Sneddon Chair of Journalism at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, which means I'm in Alaska.
What's the temperature like there?
It is 50 degrees and raining, and I'm currently looking at a fox hunting in my backyard.
Man, it is like 110 and swampy here. And the only thing outside my house are rats.
Well, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I would trade for a little summer weather.
No, I thought you might say so, Lois. Grass is always greener. We just spoke to Carl, who took a good while to recover from COVID. You've been writing about COVID recovery and lasting effects for Vox. How's recovery been for everyone else out there?
The CDC recently put out a report that says that even people with mild cases can have long-term consequences. They're reporting about a third of cases suffer long-term symptoms. So that can mean either weeks or months, depending on the person. I should note that it's important that many people fully recover. But another study in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that even 2 months after their first symptoms, 87% of people still had symptoms. And these weren't just the sickest people. Only 12% of the people in that study were admitted to an ICU. So it's not just severe cases of COVID-19 that can have these long-term consequences.
Carl didn't have many lingering aspects beyond just like losing his voice, he said. But let's talk about what other people are experiencing. What are the lasting impacts of COVID-19?
So at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were first hearing about cases in China, the reports were about respiratory symptoms.
It causes a pneumonia-like lung infection, and so far nearly 300 cases have been reported in China. At least 6 people are known to have died.
But it turns out that COVID-19 isn't just an illness that affects your lungs, and we really shouldn't just be talking about it in terms of mortality. And that's especially true in the U.S. right now, as we're seeing an uptick in the number of young people who are getting sick.
Many young people may not necessarily get sick enough to go to the hospital, but they can get very sick.
It turns out that SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, affects a lot of your major organs, including your heart, your kidneys, your brain, even your nervous system, and your bloodstream.
Yikes. Okay, well, let's take a deep breath and get into all of that. Starting with, I guess, the thing that most people are aware of. What's the lingering effects on people's lungs that we've seen?
So basically, you have all these gaps in your lungs. If you think about them like a sponge, those gaps are supposed to be there. But when you're sick with COVID-19, those spaces can get filled with debris and pus. And so that makes your lung way less flexible. Normally, when you breathe, your lung expands like a balloon. And when it's filled with all this pus, it can't do that. So in acute infections, that ends up looking like ground. You may have heard of people talking about ground glass opacities, which is on a CT scan. A normal lung will look black, and COVID-19 patients' lungs look gray. So it's kind of unclear how much of that goes away once your acute infection is gone. And it's still too early to know how many of those are going to be permanent. But we can look back at other coronaviruses that we know a little more about, like SARS and MERS. And studies on both of those coronaviruses suggest that about a third of patients have some level of reduced lung capacity for the long term. One of the studies actually followed patients for 15 years. So that suggests that some of this lung damage may be permanent.
Wow. Let's move on to the heart. What's going on with people's hearts in COVID-19, and how may those effects linger?
Yeah, just this week, there's a new study out of about 100 relatively young patients that showed that about 80% of them have inflammation or other cardiac symptoms after they've recovered, including, again, people who were never sick enough to go to the hospital. After 2 months, 78 patients still had structural changes in their heart.
And this also relates to blood circulation, I imagine?
Yeah. So in addition to the heart inflammation problem, a lot of COVID-19 patients also have abnormal blood clotting, which if you have blood clots in the major veins of your body, that can cause deep vein thrombosis. And if those clots travel to your brain, it can cause a stroke. And if it goes to your heart, it can cause a heart attack.
And the bad news keeps piling on. You mentioned the brain and the nervous system. What's going on there?
Yeah, blood clots, unfortunately, are not the only nervous system problem with this disease. A lot of patients are reporting pretty frightening neurological symptoms, like having brain fog or forgetting what they were saying in the middle of speaking and having pretty severe memory issues that keep them from working the way they normally do. One paper actually called the disease a global threat to the entire nervous system and suggested that a lot of people have these neurological symptoms, possibly as many as over a third.
It's a heavy list of COVID-19 symptoms that might linger for people.
Yeah, there's one that's a little less serious, but equally odd. Some people are reporting altered senses of taste and smell, again, for months after they first got sick. A lot of people, for some reason in particular, talk about both garlic and onions tasting weird. And some people are being followed around by a phantom smell that they can really only describe as something that's like earthy. Weirdly, it seems to be somewhat smell specific.
So the only quirky lingering effect is just really depressing if you like food.
Yeah, which I would say is a significant effect.
Yeah. If only it could have been like, some people were reporting that they had really great vision after having COVID or something like that.
So far as I know, none of these long-term symptoms make life better.
Well, I know there's so much focus on a vaccine right now, but have there been any breakthroughs in treating all of these lingering symptoms from, inflammation of the lungs to the heart to the nervous system to people losing their sense of smell and taste?
Yeah, there have been. There are a number of post-COVID-19 clinics popping up around the country. And it's really important that people know if they're having long-term symptoms, that even if we don't totally understand what's causing them, that there are treatments that can help them manage these symptoms. Some of those treatments come from research on how to recover from being hospitalized generally with other diseases. We know that if you're intubated or ventilated or you're in an ICU, especially if you're there for a long time, that can have a number of different impacts on your body. For example, being in bed for a long time causes your muscles to deteriorate, which can make any shortness of breath feel worse. And there's also significant emotional impacts of being so sick and worried about what's going to happen to you. A lot of people experience anxiety, depression, PTSD after being in the hospital. So we have research on what some of these impacts are like, and there are people who are working to help COVID patients get treatment for these kinds of symptoms.
I just feel like hearing about all of these lingering effects really brings to light the fact that this virus is just no joke, irrespective of how confident or healthy or young you might be, because you may have lingering symptoms that last potentially for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think unfortunately a lot of the conversation has been around whether or not you'll die if you get COVID-19. And unfortunately that doesn't come close to describing the many different impacts it can have on your life. It can be a really life-changing experience to be sick for months, especially when no one knows how to help you feel better. That's an incredibly anxiety-inducing and frustrating experience. I talked to one doctor in the UK who's been sick since March, and he's a doctor. He knows quite a bit about both the virus and working in an ICU is his normal day job. But he says that he feels like his life has been turned upside down. He doesn't know when he's going to be able to go back to work. And that's just a really tough position to be in.
Well, Lois, thank you for helping us understand COVID-19 a little bit more. And maybe when we understand it even further, we'll have you back on to talk about it.
Thanks for bringing more attention to this. I know a lot of people have been feeling really frustrated, and just feeling like they're being heard, I think will help, I hope.
I think it will. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Support for this show today comes from Caviar. The Caviar app offers a curated list of great local restaurants in more than 25 major American cities. Maybe that restaurant you've been hankering to try is on there. One way to find out, Dat Food, am I right?
Alexandria Ocasio on HBO.
Antitrust regulation in this country.
See for The Verge, how big a...
Mark, Jeff, and Sundar show.
Or at the very least, yeah?
Here's your host,
Ocasio-Cortez, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Leo Max.
Tim Apple, Mark Facebook, billionaire Bezos, and Sundar Google. This is the Tim, Mark, Jeff, and Sundar show. Here's your host, Sean Rameswaram.
Casey Newton, you write about tech and democracy for The Verge. How big a deal were Wednesday's hearings? Nothing quite like this had ever happened before, at the very least, yeah?
With the exception of the Microsoft antitrust case in the late 90s, we really haven't seen meaningful antitrust regulation in this country for 50 years. 13 months ago, the House Judiciary Committee and its antitrust subcommittee undertook an investigation into the market power of Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google. And in the months since, they have held 5 preliminary hearings. They've produced 1.3 million documents. And Wednesday, we had the culmination of that, this hearing where you had the CEOs of the big tech companies facing real questions about how their companies have dominated the markets they're in.
For people who couldn't watch, what did the main event look like? Because none of these dudes actually showed up, huh?
Well, as you know, Sean, we have a global pandemic that's happening right now.
Sure.
And so rather than risk it all to appear before the antitrust subcommittee, the CEOs dialed in on Cisco WebEx and appeared before an in-person hearing of many members of the antitrust subcommittee. It was kind of a hybrid. Some of the members of Congress were at their homes or offices, and some were actually there in D.C. in the committee room. And then everyone appeared on a giant grid in the manner of so many of our conversations these days.
And of course, Jeff Bezos appeared to have the nicest room because he has the most money by far.
And that is how that works. You make the most money, you have the nicest room. And that's just basic science.
So I didn't get to watch all of it, but I did get to watch some of it, including the opening statements in which each one of the tech lords laid out their inspiring American billionaire business stories with these gentle sort of preemptive suggestions that nothing about Apple, Facebook, Google, or Amazon was anti-competitive. It felt like foreshadowing.
Yeah, I mean, nobody loves America like a billionaire, right? Things are going very well for them. And they believe very firmly that they have acted within all of the relevant rules and laws and that nothing ought to change.
We also know that customers have a lot of choices and that our products face fierce competition.
Many of our competitors have hundreds of millions or billions of users. Some are upstarts, but others are gatekeepers with the power to decide if we can even release our apps in their app stores to compete with them.
research found that free services like search, Gmail, Maps, and Photos provide thousands of dollars a year in value to the average American. And many are small businesses using our digital tools to grow.
Amazon accounts for less than 1% of the $25 trillion global retail market and less than 4% of U.S. retail.
And of course, immediately thereafter, that sort of utopia they painted was pierced by the representatives on the committee. It was kind of like whiplash watching it, because it would go from like Google and the military to like Facebook and free speech to like iPhones. So why don't we just help the people at home and go company by company, starting with Apple, because Tim Cook seemed to sort of have an easy go.
The thing that is happening with Apple is that it runs one of the two dominant mobile phone operating systems, and it also operates an app store that is necessary to use any apps on that phone. And for many of the apps that run on that phone, Apple charges a 30% cut of revenue, and that is true even in cases where it makes a competing app that does not have to pay that cut. So for example, Apple makes a music product that charges $10 a month, and Spotify makes a music product that costs $10 a month. Spotify has to pay $3 of those dollars to Apple. And so many companies have come forward to say that this is hurting competition because they are unable to invest the same amount that Apple is, and that they're not able to compete.
And how did Tim Cook respond to that allegation that the App Store is inherently anti-competitive?
Tim Cook says that
84% of the apps are charged nothing. The remaining 16% either pay 15 or 30, depending upon the specifics.
And he says, hey, if you don't like it, go find another operating system on another phone.
People have like a 50-50 option there. It's Apple or Google. Did Tim Cook sort of like get off easy in the whole thing?
I think Tim Cook got off easy. He got the fewest questions of anyone up there, something like 35 questions compared to something like 60 for Zuckerberg. So it seemed like members just were not as interested in scrutinizing Apple as they were the other giants.
And everyone loves to scrutinize Facebook, including you, of course. The questions to Mark Zuckerberg felt sort of familiar, like old hat. Did they feel new and interesting to you?
You're right, and that Congress was really looking backward when it came to Facebook, whereas the antitrust questions facing the other companies feel much more current and future. With Facebook, the question was,
Mr. Zuckerberg, you have written that Facebook can likely always just buy any competitive startups. In fact, on the day Facebook bought Instagram, which you described as a threat, you wrote, quote, one thing about startups is you can often acquire them, close quote.
And so they presented a bunch of new documents, which we reported on at The Verge, that showed conversations in which Zuckerberg says that it is a competitor and he would like to neutralize that threat. Now, Zuckerberg told Congress, look,
I've been clear that Instagram was a competitor in the space of mobile photo sharing.
But we never could have imagined it was going to grow as big as it eventually did. And in fact, as Facebook says,
by having them join us, they certainly went from being a competitor in the space of being a mobile camera to an app that we could help grow and help get more people to be able to use.
Yeah, I saw that moment, and I kind of scratched my head because I felt like Instagram was pretty huge before Facebook acquired it.
It was certainly growing by the time that the ink dried on the contracts, and now today it has over 1 billion users. So, certainly Facebook had the data that showed that it was growing incredibly quickly, and that growth has done nothing but continue ever since.
Google had a much tougher go, it seemed. There were a lot of representatives taking a lot of Google's decisions recently apart.
Yeah, Google faces the most imminent risk of real antitrust action. There's been some reporting that an antitrust case may be brought against them by the federal government this summer, and a lot of it has to do with search results. When you Google something, in many cases, you will not see what you used to see on Google, which was links to websites. Instead, Google will try to answer your question for you, and often it will answer with another Google product, right? Like if you search for a location on Earth, Google will show you Google travel products. And that has made it harder to compete for other travel-based businesses, right? Or if you think about local reviews, Yelp built a whole business on reviewing local businesses, and it used to rank really highly in Google search, and then Google started to build in reviews of local businesses, and now Yelp reviews can be harder to find. So it's those kinds of things that have gotten regulators' attention, and it seems like that has been persuasive to at least some of those regulators.
So did Sundar Pichai do a good job of convincing the antitrust committee that Google is doing its best to foster competition, or, is the federal government sure to take action this summer?
I don't think he did a good job convincing, because I actually don't think that this hearing was about convincing anyone. It was much more of a forum for members of Congress to present what they had learned and to show the homework that they had done. It was rare for a CEO to get more than a few sentences out of their mouth without being interrupted and told to wrap it up.
Congresswoman, most of the data today we collect is to help users and provide personalized experiences back. Data
thank you so much, Mr. Pichai. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
In Sundar's defense, he didn't have a lot of room to make his case.
And of course, lastly, the other elephant in the room that is certainly facing a lot of allegations of being anti-competitive and was a big debut for billionaire Bezos is Amazon, right?
Yeah, he had never appeared to testify before Congress before, which seems wild. And he got questions about how Amazon's marketplace operates and whether it has made life difficult for the sellers that use that platform. Probably the thing that got the most attention is that Amazon has been accused of analyzing the sales activity on its platform, seeing what the other sellers are doing, and then saying, ooh, this is really popular, we should make one of those. And so then they make one of those, and then they promote it higher in their search results. And next thing you know, the other guy's out of business. And Amazon will tell you that's not supposed to happen. But when Bezos was asked about it today, he said he could not deny that it had happened, and he said the company was investigating, which it has been saying for months now.
How did Jeff Bezos do in his debut?
Look, he is a very genial presence. I would say he did his best to come across as reasonable. And frankly, it's easy to come across as reasonable when you're being constantly interrupted, right? Sometimes I feel like Congress would be better off if they would just let these guys talk for a little while. Like, you might actually learn something, But I will say he did stumble. For example, one of the members of Congress said, in relation to this problem of counterfeit goods, when people go to sell something on your website...
Do you require a real name and address, yes or no?
I believe we do, but let me get back to your office.
And Bezos didn't know. And the member said...
Do you require a phone number, yes or no?
That seems like a fairly basic fundamental question that you would assume the CEO of Amazon would know.
I don't know if it's required. I think we often have it.
And he did not know.
So briefly, then, how do you verify that each of these pieces of information is accurate?
I don't know the answer to your question.
And that was useful for me to know.
Something refreshing to see during this hearing, which I certainly didn't see during the impeachment hearings, was it seemed like Democrats and Republicans were united in purpose, if not motivation.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that both the Republicans and the Democrats are frustrated with these tech companies with almost an equal level of intensity. But I would also say that that only some of those complaints are rooted in reality. Like, Republicans really only have one message, which is they believe that there is a conspiracy among tech companies to systematically disadvantage conservatives from using their platforms.
Mike Wacker came out and was a whistleblower indicating that the manual blacklist targets that Google specifically goes after are those who support President Trump, who hold a conservative viewpoint, and he left your company in 2019 because he was speaking out against these outrage mobs.
And that is despite the fact that a preponderance of evidence shows that conservative elected officials outperform Democratic elected officials when it comes to the sheer reach and engagement that the things that they post on those networks receive.
Does it seem like something might finally happen?
I think that, yes, something will happen. I think that we will see antitrust legislation against Google this summer. I think we'll probably see an antitrust case against Facebook, although probably not before the election. And of course, the results of the election could change that outcome. People don't realize that there are now antitrust investigations being led separately by the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, and multiple groupings of state attorneys general into Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Apple. And so while I don't expect that the result is that going to be every tech company, broken up into smithereens, I do think we are going to see something meaningful come out of all of that. It just seems unimaginable that all of those investigations would turn out to be for naught.
Casey Newton's got a very good newsletter called The Interface. You can sign up for it at theverge.com/interface. And after the break, I'm going to talk to Kara Swisher about the staggering amount of power these four dudes have. From all of Brett Ernest operates at Ernest.
That there are times where the best about what to this right now.
Tucker Carlson went after Jeff Bezos for making $13 billion in one day.
20 years ago, if that had happened, if a captain of industry had made $13 billion in a single day while the country got poorer, the Democratic Party would have had something to say about it. Not anymore, because the people getting rich are members of the Democratic Party.
But that wasn't particularly strange. It's rare anyone makes $13 billion in a day. It's worth questioning how that happened. The strange part transpired at the end of Tucker's show when he was doing his handoff with Sean Hannity, who always follows. You've seen these handoffs on cable. They're usually fluffy, flattering, fatuous. This one was not that.
Have a great night. And now, Sean Hannity takes over from New York.
People can make money. They provide goods and services people want, need, and desire. That's America. It's called freedom, capitalism, and as long as it's honest, right? People decide. All right, Tucker, great show. Welcome to...
What you can't see is Tucker's face. He is frowning. He looks displeased with his colleague who just called him out. It's rare to see Sean Hannity call out Tucker Carlson on live TV, and it was strange that the thing they were pecking at each other over was the wealth of Jeff Bezos. Kara Swisher noticed as well, and she wrote about it for the New York Times.
Tucker Carlson looked totally tweaked. And then he had to sort of dial it back in a tweet saying, well, if it was dishonestly, obviously not, but honestly, I believe in capitalism. So it was this weird thing. But the point of the matter is the $13 billion, and everybody focused on the money that Jeff Bezos has or the money that Mark Zuckerberg has. And all the tech moguls, Bloomberg keeps a list, have made enormous amounts of money during the pandemic.
For people like Tucker Carlson who can't really quite wrap their heads around how someone like Jeff Bezos could make $13 billion in one day. How does that happen?
The stock of Amazon. He owns a lot of Amazon. And so Amazon's gone up. It's done a really good job of delivery. It's become a necessary service. We've sort of fast forward a decade in terms of use of delivery services. And he is the one who has the services that work in a pandemic really well compared to other retailers. Now, other retailers are trying really hard, but Amazon is just doing great. And of course, they've got their cloud services, which has always been super strong. And he's, sort of trying to virus-proof his distribution system, not always successful. There's been a lot of illnesses at Amazon warehouses.
Has it borne out for Google and Facebook and Apple too?
Everybody. All of them are doing great. And they're more powerful than ever as they go, to try to get Congress not to legislate against them.
How should people be thinking about it? I mean, is it great that these American tech companies are profiting hugely off of this pandemic, or is it problematic? I mean, did they set up the businesses that would succeed in this moment, and should we be happy for them?
Well, it is what it is, right? As President Trump likes to say. They do have these businesses. They're not in the restaurant business. They're not in the theater business. But everybody's being accelerated by a decade. That's what you have to think about. This is trends that were going in Amazon's direction or Google's direction are now accelerated. And so Mark Cuban, I did an interview with him on Pivot, and he was like, this is a huge economic experiment to see if we were going to actually change our economy, which we are. Our economy is about to change in a massive way in terms of workers, in terms of benefits, and lots of stuff like that. And it was trending that way, but now it's really trending that way.
You seem to suggest in your op-ed in the New York Times that people should spend less time worrying about how much money these guys are making and spend more time thinking about how much power they're amassing.
Yes, I can think about it like the Rockefellers. Look, they stayed rich, and good thing, because the foundation gave away lots of money later. And it's the same thing with these rich people. Mark's giving away money, Mackenzie Scott is giving away money. So they're going to stay rich. The issue is, like, the Rockefellers got out of power when there started to be legislation, like the power that they held over society. But the fact is that that's not going down until Amazon goes down. And so the question is, how much power should these companies, and how many guardrails and regulations and ways to stop them from being totally dominant? And there are no rules for the internet companies compared to Wall Street or chemical companies or car companies. Everybody else has regulations except internet people. And then on the sidelight is you see this damage being done, whether it's hate speech or addiction or this and that. It's all systemic to the fact that they have total power and we have no control as a society.
And we've talked about this with you before, and Casey just said he thinks there might finally be some antitrust action this summer. I guess we'll see. Why is this so hard to do for tech?
I don't know. I don't understand it because Republicans and Democrats can't agree on something they absolutely should agree on, depending on the company. Now, the problem is each of these companies have a different issue. Apple has to do with the App Store, and that could maybe be by rules and regulations, right? That doesn't have to, you don't have to break up Apple to do that. Amazon's got some issues around marketplace and also selling things. Like, I think the people who sell on the marketplace have good question to be worried about Amazon products being sold under. I bought an Amazon safe the other day because it was so much cheaper. It was and it was the same safe.
Is it like Amazon branded safe?
Yes, it is. It's an Amazon safe, and I'm sure he has the numbers.
Yeah, I didn't think you'd trust that safe, Karen.
Well, it was like so I tend to try to buy, and then I'm like, why am I buying branded stuff? I'm being charged for branded, so why not? Like this white label stuff that Amazon makes. Some of the batteries, why should I pay triple for batteries because they're Duracell when they're the exact same batteries? And so, you sort of sit there, you're like, which ridiculous conglomerate do I want an advantage here? But the one who has the lower prices. And so that's the issue with them. And then there's Google, which of course has search dominance. You've seen a lot of stories recently about that they advantage their products in search. And besides the fact that they have so much search dominance, which is crazy, right? I mean, think about it, like 90-some%, that's another issue, but then they also have products that compete. Apple also has products that compete with Spotify. When they go into music, they have special rules when they go directly against, when they move into services that compete directly with their customers, there be special rules. And then Facebook is just a lot of stuff. Should they own Instagram? Should they have all the means of social communication? Should they dominate social communications? And so, and then there's the hate speech on there. Is their inability to control misinformation. These are people in power that are affecting our society that are unelected. So they've become editorial entities without having any editorial oversight. And so over a massive system that's impossible to monitor because they've made it the way it is.
I wonder, if the last few months have taught us anything, it's that, like, people still do have power in our democracy. But I feel like this is the sort of evergreen question we ask on our show. Like, what would it take for people to rise up and say, hey, you know what, Facebook, you know what, Instagram, Twitter, you've gone too far, you need to do something about X. And I still wonder what it would take to get people there.
I don't know, because, the problem is you get a lot of free good stuff that you like. I always, as you know, I call citizens cheap dates to the tech companies. They get all the money. We get like a dating app or a map. God, I got a map. Thank you so much. Like, what do you mean? You took data from the government that we paid for and then repurposed it and sold it to us and then took our data. And now you have $13 billion in one day. Oh, how nice that is. If that's said, these are innovative people who've created really great products. They just need some regulation. By the way, welcome to your billions, Mr. Bezos. He created something from nothing, but he sat on the system that was created for him by the government, and the government should have some say in some of it. And they shouldn't be able to sell a safe for half the price of another company. and then put it up there in front of you, and then being the only way it can be delivered. And then, it takes just a second to be like, oh, I'm exhausted with COVID. My kids are screaming. I need a friggin' safe. Like, just deliver it to me, Mr. Bezos.
And what if we do all just give up and submit to Facebook and Amazon and Apple and Twitter? I mean,
well, I'm not Facebook. I came off of it. I don't want their information. I don't want their grubby, thieving hands in my data. That's how I look at it. I quit Instagram too. Yeah.
Fair. Can you just remind people what the dangers are of not regulating these tech companies?
They'll grab every piece of your data and turn you into Soylent Green. I don't know what else to say, right? Whatever. The internet is people. They'll take your data and they use it in any way they can. And they need some regulation. And eventually these hacking incidents will get worse, and you will not own yourself. That is what I feel is the problem. You need to own yourself.
All right, Kara. Thank you so much.
Right.
Appreciate
Thank
your time.
You. All right. Good luck.
No, I appreciate it.
Don't buy a safe. Resist. Resist.
Guys, we did it. We listened to the news. We did our yoga. Got 2 episodes of Today Explained in. And we did it all while high. All we need now is an affirmation. To keep working on the website. Or not to keep working on the website. First client. It's really been motivational. I really appreciate this help. And new people joining. Thank you guys for showing up. Moldova, Amon, Samantha Lynn. Noodle, don't noodle. You're too worried about what once was and not what will be. However, there's a saying. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. But today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. Guys, thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next episode.